Moscow's skies have just witnessed one of the most shocking and disruptive moments in modern military history. Ukraine has launched the largest, most coordinated, and most destructive aerial assault on Russian territory since the war began. Hundreds of kamikaze drones were unleashed simultaneously in an effort to completely paralyze the heart of Russia and its airspace. Even strategic sites, located just 15 kilometers from Vladimir Putin's ultimate center of power, the Kremlin, were struck during this massive operation. The capital's lifelines, including critical energy infrastructure and logistics networks, were rocked by wave after wave of explosions. The resulting chaos forced the total suspension of operations at Moscow's four major international airports. Hundreds of commercial aircraft were either left circling in the air or forced into emergency route changes. Yet the most ironic and thought-provoking detail emerged at the very peak of the turmoil. While Moscow descended into chaos, Russian President Vladimir Putin appeared in the city of Kazan, thousands of kilometers away. For the first time in a long while, Putin mingled with crowds in an apparent effort to send a message to both the Russian people and the wider world that everything remained under control. But while he smiled for cameras, the seat of power behind him, Moscow, was facing the largest firestorms in its history. At that exact moment, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky delivered a statement that captured the brutal logic behind the entire military picture. Zelensky declared that this operation was not simply an act of retaliation, but the beginning of a new strategic era. What we are witnessing is not a routine cross-border raid. It is a major turning point that could fundamentally alter the course of the war itself. The strategic targets selected for the operation strongly support that conclusion. Ukrainian military planners chose one of Russia's most sensitive and irreplaceable economic assets for this enormous strike. The primary target was the Kapotnya oil refinery in southeastern Moscow. This facility is far more than an ordinary industrial complex. It is a giant that supplies roughly 40% of the Moscow region's gasoline and half of its diesel fuel. The deliberate targeting of the refinery's fractional distillation towers, operated by Gazprom Neft, reflects extraordinary military planning. These towers rely on advanced valves and processing equipment that Russia cannot manufacture domestically because of Western sanctions, and importing them has become virtually impossible. In other words, Ukraine did not simply destroy a fuel facility. It struck a sophisticated technological network whose restoration could take months or perhaps even years. The result is a crippling logistical blow capable of directly slowing the operational tempo of mechanized forces on the front line. The way Ukraine executed this operation is equally remarkable. Ukrainian military intelligence and the newly established unmanned systems forces employed a true swarm strategy. While between 194 and 200 drones were directed specifically toward Moscow's airspace, the total number launched across Russia exceeded 550. The operation's primary platform is believed to have been the Ukrainian-made Firepoint FP-1 fixed-wing drone, known for its speed that resembles a jet-powered aircraft. These lethal systems were supported by the RS-1 bars jet-powered UAVs, valued for their long-range capabilities, as well as the bar's SM Gladiator variants equipped with heavier warheads. One of the most significant advantages of these drones is their ability to launch from virtually any location without requiring a runway, thanks to rocket-assisted launch systems. In other words, Ukraine appears to have eliminated every possible time constraint in preparing and executing the strike that shook Moscow. Yet a crucial question remains. How did such a massive drone fleet travel hundreds of kilometers through Russian territory without being detected? Military radar and routing analyses suggest that Ukraine may have routed drones launched from the Sumy and Chernihiv regions through Bryansk Oblast. These drones are capable of flying extremely low, skimming treetops, while using terrain masking to exploit the landscape. This flight profile allows them to pass through the blind spots of Russia's large and cumbersome long-range radar systems. In addition, Ukrainian intelligence reportedly uses satellite data to map radar coverage gaps throughout Russian airspace. These three-dimensional digital maps can then be loaded directly into drone autopilot systems, enabling each drone to alter its route automatically whenever it approaches a radar detection zone. At the same time, smaller attacks launched that night in Rostov, and occupied territories successfully executed a distraction strategy aimed at Russian command and control centers. Along the route, known Russian electronic warfare sites and radar stations were reportedly bypassed by Vanguard decoy drones embedded within the swarm. Russia's inability to prevent the attack has become another major point of discussion. Prior to the strike, the Kremlin had repeatedly assured both domestic and international audiences that Moscow possessed the safest and most impenetrable airspace in the world. To reinforce that perception, remarkable military activity had recently been recorded throughout the capital. Massive Mi-26 helicopters, the heaviest transport helicopters ever built, were seen flying over Moscow carrying highly classified cargo. These giant aircraft were transporting Pantsir S-MDE short-range air defense systems to the rooftops of skyscrapers and strategically important buildings. The installation of these systems atop structures, such as the prestigious Nord Star Tower, demonstrated that an urban missile fortress was effectively being constructed around the city. Yet this effort can also be viewed as a visible sign of desperation. Placing a Pantsir system on the roof of a 42-story civilian building introduces significant risks, including powerful vibrations and wind loads that could threaten structural integrity. By accepting such an extreme logistical challenge, the Russian General Staff effectively acknowledged that traditional radar networks were struggling to detect low-flying threats. The purpose of rooftop deployment was to overcome radar shadows created by Moscow's dense urban landscape and artificially extend the radar horizon. Under normal circumstances, Moscow is regarded as one of the most heavily defended cities on Earth. Its outer defensive ring consists of long-range systems, such as the S-300 and S-400, designed to intercept ballistic missiles and aerial threats hundreds of kilometers away. The middle defensive ring is formed by Pantsir S-MDE systems positioned on buildings, specifically designed to engage low-altitude drones and capable of carrying up to 48 mini-missiles each. Collectively, these systems are believed to possess the ability to launch more than 700 missiles simultaneously. Yet, despite this enormous and extraordinarily expensive shield, the entire defense architecture encountered a simple but devastating mathematical problem. The layered air defense doctrine inherited from the Soviet era was designed primarily to counter NATO strategic bombers and intercontinental ballistic missiles. These systems were optimized for large, extremely fast targets appearing in predictable numbers. Instead, they faced hundreds of loitering aerial objects traveling at roughly 200 kilometers per hour, producing sounds more reminiscent of mopeds or small jet turbines and carrying almost non-existent radar signatures. This asymmetric threat profile overwhelmed systems never designed to process it. Sophisticated algorithms became gridlocked by what were essentially flying platforms made from fiberglass and inexpensive components. When Ukraine's drone swarm flooded radar screens with both genuine threats and decoys, Russian air defenses entered a state of total saturation. As Pantsir and S-400 batteries locked onto the first visible targets and launched interceptors, the airspace behind them was effectively left exposed to the real strike drones. While Russian crews attempted to reload and replenish their missile stocks, Ukrainian kamikaze drones continued gliding toward their targets with little to no resistance. Missiles worth millions of dollars, requiring months to manufacture, proved incapable of stopping mass-produced drones costing only a fraction of that amount. The economics of the situation reveal the depth of the challenge facing the Kremlin. A single S-400 missile costs millions of dollars, while many Ukrainian decoy drones constructed from simple materials such as wood or plastic cost only a few thousand. Russia is therefore forced to destroy relatively cheap targets using enormously expensive interceptors, creating an asymmetry that is difficult to reverse. Furthermore, each Pantsir system can only engage a limited number of targets simultaneously. When dozens of threats appear on radar at the same moment, processing capacity becomes overwhelmed, and the system effectively blinds itself. Ukraine appears to have exploited precisely these software and physical limitations to shatter the economics of Russia's air defense network. The facilities targeted during the operation also carry profound economic significance. The Kapotnya refinery is not merely an energy installation. It functions as a logistical fuel hub for Russia's military machine. Disabling it means far more than creating inconvenience for civilian drivers. It threatens the fuel supply chains supporting military convoys and armored formations moving toward the front. Russian military doctrine depends heavily on rail transport, and those rail networks rely on diesel-powered locomotives. The disruption of Kapotnya directly impacts the mobility of trains transporting ammunition, food supplies, and reinforcements to tens of thousands of Russian troops operating inside Ukraine. This is precisely why a strike conducted hundreds of kilometers from the battlefield can achieve far greater strategic effects than thousands of artillery rounds fired directly at the front. Through this refined, long-range strike capability, Ukraine has pushed the conflict into a far more costly, exhausting, and unavoidable phase for Russia's political elite. As Zelensky suggested, economic and psychological shocks of this magnitude may increase the likelihood of serious negotiations. Tactical gains on the battlefield alone cannot compensate for the enormous strategic damage inflicted by billion-dollar losses in the heart of Moscow. The picture that is emerging is becoming increasingly clear. The ability to strike a strategic zone so close to the Kremlin delivers one of the heaviest blows ever dealt to Russia's image of invulnerability. Such an event has the potential to create a profound fracture in the morale of Russian forces enduring difficult frontline conditions. A soldier struggling with shortages in a trench may begin questioning the competence of the command structure when even the nation's capital, the place believed to be safest, is seen burning. Sustaining troop morale under such circumstances becomes one of the most difficult challenges any military leadership can face. Equally significant is the reaction of the Russian public. For years, many citizens were led to believe that the war would never reach their homes. Now they are witnessing black smoke rising over their own city. Faced with this reality, questions about whether the Putin administration can genuinely protect the country may begin to surface among both ordinary citizens and influential elites. Moscow's wealthy elite and oligarchs had long experienced the war primarily as a distant narrative broadcast through television screens. But when air defense missiles explode near their homes, businesses, and luxury lifestyles, they begin to feel the direct consequences of the conflict. This psychological shift has the potential to deepen political fractures behind the closed doors of the Kremlin. As a result, the Moscow operation is increasingly being viewed as one of the most effective demonstrations of asymmetric warfare in modern military history. By combining Western technological support with domestic engineering innovation, Ukraine has developed a weapons arsenal that is remarkably inexpensive, yet capable of producing enormous strategic effects. Military analysts have described this evolving battlefield reality as World War I with drones. Just as machine guns and artillery transformed warfare into trench-bound stalemates during World War I, autonomous unmanned systems are now turning modern front lines into static landscapes of attrition. Yet Ukraine has attempted to break that stalemate by shifting the war's center of gravity away from the front lines and hundreds of kilometers into Russia's strategic rear. Instead of focusing solely on battlefield breakthroughs, it has targeted production facilities, refineries, and critical infrastructure. In response, Russia has been forced to redeploy valuable air defense systems away from the front and back toward Moscow. This weakens frontline protection and creates opportunities for Ukrainian forces to operate more freely in contested airspace. Russian mechanized formations operating under a reduced air defense umbrella become increasingly vulnerable to FPV drones and long-range artillery. The question now is whether Putin can contain the crisis that has emerged. Repairing damaged refineries under the weight of sanctions and technological restrictions represents a logistical challenge that could require months or even years. The resulting decline in refining capacity threatens one of Russia's most important sources of revenue, refined petroleum exports. while simultaneously increasing the risk of domestic fuel shortages. Recent reports suggest that Russian gasoline production has fallen to its lowest level in 16 years, prompting authorities to introduce fuel quotas and cash payment requirements at some stations. The disruption of billions of dollars in energy export revenues creates a major strain on the budget funding the war effort. Without those revenues, sustaining ammunition production and military payrolls becomes increasingly difficult. On the broader geopolitical stage, the strike may also strengthen confidence among NATO members and Western allies regarding continued support for Ukraine. By demonstrating an ability to reach deep inside Russia using domestically produced systems, Ukraine challenges long-standing fears of escalation and expands the range of options considered acceptable by its supporters. This military success significantly strengthens Kyiv's position diplomatically. Zelensky can now point to battlefield results as evidence that future support should include not only defensive assistance, but also offensive capabilities capable of accelerating the end of the conflict. The pessimism that once dominated many Western capitals may gradually give way to renewed confidence and a more assertive support strategy inspired by the fires that illuminated Moscow's skies. Ultimately, this moment represents more than the destruction of an oil refinery. It symbolizes a fundamental transformation in the nature of 21st century warfare. No capital city can confidently claim complete security from unmanned technologies, even when located hundreds of kilometers from active combat zones. Ukraine's operation forces the Kremlin into a painful choice between military prestige and economic reality. The days ahead may reveal how these asymmetric strategies influence diplomatic negotiations and reshape the broader balance of power. What do you think? Could Ukraine's ability to penetrate Moscow's air defenses on such a scale trigger a major crisis of confidence in the Putin government among the Russian public? And under growing logistical and financial pressure, how much longer can Russia sustain the war if critical economic lifelines continue to come under attack? Share your thoughts in the comments below.